The air was thick with tension as the rumble of aircraft engines echoed overhead, drowning out distant gunfire and explosions. On July 25, 1944, the Wehrmacht soldiers stationed in St. Lo looked up, their faces reflecting a mix of confidence and disdain. They believed they were prepared for anything the Americans could throw at them, dismissing their opponents as inexperienced and overly reliant on air support. As the sun rose over the battered city, seasoned German veterans, hardened by years of fighting on the Eastern Front, exchanged sardonic remarks about the impending assault. They had survived the brutal Soviet offensives and felt that confronting the Americans would be a mere stroll in the park. Yet, beneath their bravado lay an undercurrent of uncertainty. Little did they know that in just 8 hours, everything would change. Months leading up to this day had been filled with brewing tensions. The Allies had launched a series of offensives in Normandy, a region previously thought impenetrable by German forces. St. Lo, viewed as a vital stronghold, was essential for controlling routes into the heart of France. German commanders, secure in their positions, fortified their defences, convinced that their experienced troops and heavy artillery would easily repel any American advances. As they reinforced the city's fortifications, laughter echoed among the ranks, a stark contrast to the growing threat outside. The months leading to summer 1944 had been a grueling mix of conflict and uncertainty for the Wehrmacht. Encounters with the Soviets had left their soldiers battle-hardened, yet weary. With the American forces pushing deeper into Normandy, fear and resentment began to creep in. German leaders reassured their troops, proclaiming, "They bombard, we defend." Emboldened by past victories, the soldiers felt a dangerous sense of invincibility. However, the harsh realities of war weighed heavily on their spirits as the days passed. At 8 o'clock that morning, the American offensive erupted with the deafening roar of bombers. The sound reverberated through St. Lo, heralding destruction that the Wehrmacht soldiers were unprepared for. The German defences, thought to be impenetrable, shook under the relentless assault. For a moment the ground trembled and dust filled the air, yet the defenders remained resolute, instincts sharpened by years of combat. As the dust settled, American infantry advanced with fierce determination, contradicting the Germans' expectations of a hesitant approach. Moments of disbelief among the German ranks quickly turned to panic as they witnessed their carefully constructed plans unraveling. The atmosphere shifted. What was once a confident defense transformed into a desperate struggle for survival. With each passing hour, the Wehrmacht's situation worsened. The very walls they had vowed to protect began to crumble under the onslaught of American fire. Soldiers who once scoffed at the Americans' supposed lack of grit now fought desperately, eyes wide with disbelief. As tanks rolled through the streets, the invincibility they once felt faded into chaos and loss. In the heart of the city, Sergeant Klaus fought to maintain order amidst the turmoil. Years of leading men through Eastern Front battles had taught him resilience, but now, as the ground shook from bombardments, disbelief and dread replaced his pride. "Stand your ground," he shouted, struggling to keep his composure amidst the overwhelming weight of responsibility. Looking around, he saw the grim faces of his men, filled with fear and confusion. The realization that they might not hold St. Lo settled heavily on his chest, a crushing weight threatening to suffocate him. Months earlier, the atmosphere at the Wehrmacht command center was charged with a mix of determination and overconfidence. Since the beginning of 1944, Klaus and his fellow soldiers had felt the weight of the escalating conflict. The Allies had begun their relentless push in Normandy, and every inch of territory was hard fought. The German High Command, meanwhile, clung to the belief that their fortified positions were impregnable. They had witnessed fierce Soviet resistance, but felt assured that the Americans, relying on air superiority and new tactics, would falter against seasoned veterans. Klaus vividly remembered the day he first received news of the Allied landings. He had been in a routine training exercise when the report came in, sending a chill down his spine. Over the following months, rumors of American forces preparing to assault St. Lo began to circulate. The command insisted that their defenses would hold, yet an unspoken anxiety lingered among the soldiers. As weeks passed, the morale within Klaus's unit fluctuated. The brutal encounters with Soviet forces had left many battle-hardened but weary. Officers often reassured them, proclaiming, "We are the defenders of the fatherland," yet Klaus sensed an undercurrent of doubt. Were they truly prepared for the unknown capabilities of their new adversaries? In a strategy meeting just days before the assault, optimism permeated the room. Commanders confidently discussed their plans, presenting maps depicting their fortified positions. "The Americans will come at us in waves," one officer declared, "and we will send them back in pieces." Klaus felt torn between loyalty to his superiors and the gnawing uncertainty building in his gut. Preparations for defense escalated, with the sounds of war creating a deceptive sense of security. The rumble of tanks and clattering boots echoed through the streets of St. Lo, while the camaraderie among soldiers began to feel fragile. Whispers of fear began to surface in conversations, replacing the laughter that had once filled the air. Then came July 25th, 1944. As the first light of dawn broke, Klaus stood among his comrades, adrenaline coursing through them. They had been ordered to remain vigilant, but as aircraft engines roared overhead, a collective anxiety settled over the men. The initial bombardment was like nothing they had experienced, an overwhelming cacophony that rattled their nerves and shook their defenses. In those moments, Klaus's heart raced as he realized the Americans were not merely coming. They were storming in full force. Explosions reverberated through the streets, creating a grim atmosphere thick with dust and despair. The confidence that had buoyed them for months began to dissolve, replaced by the stark reality of impending chaos. And Klaus looked around, seeing the faces of the men he had fought beside. Their expressions, once filled with determination, now reflected fear and disbelief. "We must hold," he reminded himself, but the weight of uncertainty clouded his thoughts. The joviality of previous days was replaced by a chilling silence, a prelude to the storm. With each passing minute, the bombardment intensified, and Klaus felt the ground tremble beneath him. The carefully crafted plans of the German High Command seemed to unravel as the first wave of American infantry surged forward. Klaus realized that the very foundation of their confidence had been built on fragile illusions. The reality of battle unfolded before him, and he could only hope they could withstand the onslaught long enough to regroup and fight back. As the deafening roar of bombers faded, the American infantry surged forward, their determination palpable. Klaus gripped his rifle tightly, knuckles white against the weapon's cold metal. The moment he had dreaded was upon them. The plans of the German command were collapsing under the intensity of the assault. The distant shouts of his comrades mingled with the thunderous explosions that rained down around them, creating a chaotic symphony of war. The landscape transformed drastically in mere moments. Buildings that had stood as symbols of German strength crumbled under the relentless barrage. The air thickened with dust and smoke, casting a pall over the battlefield. Klaus's heart raced as the first wave of American soldiers approached, their faces set with grim determination. They charged forward, moving with a cohesion that took him by surprise. "Stand firm, men!" Klaus shouted, his voice straining above the din. He fought to instill resolve in his fellow soldiers, but he saw doubt creeping into their eyes. The Americans were not the hesitant attackers they had anticipated. They pressed forward with fervor. As the first shots rang out, Klaus assessed the scene. The ground shook with artillery impacts, and the acrid smell of smoke filled his lungs. His comrades fired desperately from makeshift barricades, while the Americans advanced relentlessly. The vibrant colors of the battlefield blurred together in a haze of gunfire and dust, creating a surreal atmosphere. The weight of reality pressed heavily upon Klaus. He noticed a young private beside him, eyes wide with fear as he fumbled with his weapon. "Focus!" Klaus urged, stepping closer. "Remember your training. We can hold this position." Each word felt like a fragile lifeline, anchoring the young soldier amid chaos. But the enemy continued to press forward, their numbers overwhelming. Tanks rolled through the streets, sending shockwaves through German lines. Klaus realized the determination in the eyes of the advancing soldiers. Their resolve was unwavering as they mounted their assault. In the midst of chaos, time felt distorted. Each moment stretched into eternity as Klaus fought to maintain his composure. The silence that had once enveloped his thoughts shattered under the cries of the wounded and the relentless gunfire. Fear threatened to take hold, but his training urged him to lead and inspire. "Form a line! Protect the flanks!" Klaus bellowed, rallying the soldiers around him. Panic spread as they began to falter under the assault. This was not the easy victory they had anticipated. The Americans had come prepared and resolute. As the American soldiers closed in, Klaus took a deep breath, pushing aside his fear. He remembered the faces of his comrades, men who had fought valiantly beside him, sharing laughter and stories in quieter times. They were counting on him now. With renewed determination, he raised his rifle, taking aim as the enemy approached. "Fight!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "For our brothers, for our home!" The words rang out with fervor, hoping to ignite a spark of resistance in the hearts of his men. Klaus fired into the advancing tide, feeling a flicker of hope amid the chaos, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they could still fight for their survival. The battle raged on, each moment an intense struggle for existence. Klaus's instincts took over, focusing on the task at hand, driven by the desperate desire to protect his comrades and defend their ground. Yet deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this day would change everything. As the chaos of battle enveloped Klaus and his men, a stark realization began to settle within him. While they fought bravely to defend Saint-Lô, it was increasingly clear that their situation was precarious. The relentless advance of American forces, combined with the barrage of artillery, was overwhelming their defenses. Klaus felt the ground shake beneath him, a grim reminder of the power of the assault. As he continued firing, his mind raced, grappling with the implications of their predicament. While observing the advancing American lines, Klaus began to think about their strategic position. He reflected amidst the chaos. The Germans had always believed in their superiority, but this was different. The Americans seemed to be coordinated, their maneuvers fluid and practiced. What had they missed in their preparations? Was it overconfidence that had led them to dismiss their enemy? He glanced at his comrades. Many were focused on the immediate battlefield, but Klaus could see the doubt lingering in their eyes. They had always prided themselves on their ability to withstand enemy attacks, but now, with each passing moment, the weight of uncertainty became more pronounced. The initial confidence that had buoyed them in the early stages of the assault began to fade. Klaus suppressed a shudder as he realized just how unprepared they were for this particular onslaught. The superior training and morale of the American troops were evident. He recalled earlier meetings with command, where they had spoken dismissively of their opponents. "They'll come at us in waves," they had said, "but our defenses will hold." Yet, as he watched the Americans push forward, he began to question the validity of that stance. Amidst the noise of gunfire and explosions, Klaus's thoughts turned to logistics. The German command had underestimated the speed and ferocity of the American advance. Equipment that had once seemed adequate now appeared insufficient against the sheer scale of the offensive. The tanks rolling into the streets were unlike anything they had faced before, and the coordinated infantry support was relentless. How could they have failed to see this coming, he wondered. Despite the chaos, Klaus's instincts kicked in. He recognized the need for a change in strategy, a shift in focus that could unify his men. We need to regroup and communicate, he thought, scanning the battlefield for opportunities to reconnect with his troops. If we can hold the center while flanking their positions, we may stand a chance. But achieving that would require quick thinking and decisive actions. Get to the command post, he shouted to a nearby squad. We need to coordinate our fire. He could see the soldiers rallying around him, fueled by desperation and the instinct to survive. Each man knew they were fighting not just for territory, but for their lives and the lives of their comrades. As they pulled back to form a tighter defense, Klaus could feel the shift in energy. There was still fear, but it was now mingled with determination. They were prepared to fight, to adapt in the face of adversity. He could sense a flicker of hope igniting within his men, a shared understanding that they could still resist the tide. Klaus took a breath, focusing on the horizon where the American forces were massing. We will not fall today, he vowed silently. We owe it to each other to stand strong. The fight began again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. Each shot fired was not simply an act of survival, but a declaration of their resolve. Klaus could see his comrades rallying, their fear transformed into action, their desire to protect one another fueling their tenacity. As the battle raged on, Klaus understood that this day would mark a turning point, not just for the war, but for every man fighting alongside him. They were learning that the weight of experience must be matched by adaptability and vigilance. In that moment, Klaus knew that their struggle was not just for victory, but for the very essence of what it meant to be a soldier. The echoes of gunfire became a testament to their resilience, a reminder that even when faced with overwhelming odds, hope could still emerge from the ashes of despair. As the fierce battle continued, Klaus and his comrades fought with renewed determination. It was a defining moment that would shape their fates, and Klaus knew he had to act decisively. Rallying his men, he urged them to hold their positions and prepare for the next wave of American soldiers. Each soldier's face reflected the strain of battle, but beneath their fear lay a spark of resolve. Once the chaos settled momentarily, Klaus made his way through the smoke to the makeshift command post at the edge of their defensive line. The area was chaotic, filled with commanders and soldiers shouting orders amidst the din. Klaus spotted Lieutenant Müller, a seasoned officer with whom he had fought alongside for years. "Müller," Klaus called out, pushing through the throng. "We need to adapt our strategy. The Americans are more organized than we anticipated. We should regroup our forces and concentrate fire on their flanks." Müller, grim-faced and weary, nodded. "You're right. We've lost too many men holding this position. If we can outmaneuver them, we might gain the upper hand." Together, they gathered a small team of officers and soldiers, crafting a new plan. They discussed the details in hushed tones, eyes darting to the battlefield where American troops pressed forward. The urgency of the situation weighed heavily on them, but Klaus felt a sense of camaraderie among the group, men united by a common purpose. "Listen up," Klaus addressed the gathered soldiers. "We need to form a defensive perimeter, focusing our fire on their advancing flanks. We'll draw them in closer before we strike. This is our chance." With renewed resolve, the soldiers dispersed to execute the plan. Klaus returned to his position, heart racing as he prepared for the next wave. The Americans regrouped, their formations tightening for another assault. Klaus could feel the tension in the air. As the American troops charged forward again, Klaus took a deep breath and steadied his rifle. "Now!" he shouted, signaling his comrades to unleash their fire. The sound of gunfire erupted, a chorus of defiance filling the air as they directed their shots at the advancing soldiers. The battlefield became a blur of motion. Klaus heard the shouts of his fellow soldiers, the blasts of artillery, and cries of the wounded. Yet amid the chaos, he found clarity, a fierce determination to protect his home and comrades. The Americans, once an overwhelming force, began to falter against the unexpected resistance. In the turmoil, Klaus noticed the young private he had encouraged earlier, now firing with newfound confidence. The boy's face reflected determination, his fear replaced by focus. Klaus felt pride knowing they were fighting for each other. Hours passed, the battle shifting like quicksand beneath them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the devastated landscape, Klaus and his men realized they had turned the tide. The American forces, once relentless, now hesitated, reassessing their approach. Klaus exchanged glances with Müller, who coordinated with other units. A sense of unity blossomed among the men. They were in this together, ready to face whatever came next. The sounds of battle echoed around them, but Klaus found strength in the bonds forged through shared struggle. The fight for Saint-Lô was far from over, but at that moment he felt a flicker of hope. They had adapted, fought back, and together they would confront the next challenge. "Remember what we're fighting for," Klaus shouted to his fellow soldiers. "As long as we stand together, we can overcome anything." His rallying cry resonated through the ranks, igniting a fire in the hearts of the men. They were soldiers, united in purpose, ready to face the storm ahead. As the battle for Saint-Lô raged on, the atmosphere shifted. Klaus and his men had managed to turn the tide against the American forces, but the cost of their resistance was becoming painfully evident. Exhaustion weighed heavily on each soldier, and the relentless sounds of conflict, the gunfire, the blasts of artillery, and the cries of the wounded gnawed at their spirits. It was becoming clear that victory would demand even greater sacrifices. Logistical challenges began to surface. Supplies were dwindling, and they faced a critical shortage of ammunition. Klaus could sense the growing tension among his comrades as they debated how to best allocate their dwindling resources. Do we conserve our ammunition for a decisive moment, or do we keep firing to maintain pressure? One soldier questioned, anxiety creeping into his voice. Klaus felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him. He understood the necessity of conserving supplies, yet the fear of a sudden American counterattack pushed him to consider a more aggressive approach. "We cannot afford to let up," he stated firmly. The discussions unfolded under the strain of differing opinions. Some argued for a tactical retreat to regroup, while others insisted they should press forward. Amidst the debate, Klaus's thoughts turned to the civilians caught in the crossfire. The town of Saint-Lô was their home, and its streets were now reduced to rubble. Protecting their comrades felt paramount, but he couldn't shake the concern for the innocent lives affected by the brutal conflict. What will become of them if we fail? He wondered. Just then a shout broke through the clamor. "Incoming troops!" Klaus turned to see a fresh wave of American soldiers advancing, well-equipped and disciplined. The urgency of the moment snapped the soldiers back to focus, and Klaus felt adrenaline surge through him. "Positions," he commanded, and the men sprang into action. The earlier discussions about supplies faded as the immediacy of the battle took over. They had little time to strategize. They simply had to act. As the Americans advanced, Klaus's heart raced. He crouched behind a barricade, rifle steady in his hands, eyes scanning the field. Once the aggressors, they were now fighting to hold their ground against a relentless enemy. The clash began, and gunfire erupted around them. Klaus focused on the enemy's movements, his training guiding his aim. He could see determination in their eyes, mirroring his own. The Germans fought as a unified entity, driven by shared purpose. Despite their efforts, the Americans pressed forward, and Klaus felt the strain. "We need to hold the line," he shouted, but fatigue began to take its toll. Men fell around him, and the loss weighed heavily on his heart. Each casualty reminded him of the stakes at play. Hours passed, and it became clear this was not just a battle for territory. It was a test of resilience and spirit. Despite their numbers, the Americans faced formidable resolve among the German soldiers. Klaus felt the tide turning again as they pushed back, reclaiming lost ground. However, the struggle was far from over. Logistics remained a pressing issue, and the emotional toll was evident. Klaus mentally noted those who had fallen, knowing he would carry the weight of their sacrifices. The fight for St. Lo would be remembered for the bonds forged in the fire of war. In that moment of clarity, Klaus vowed to honor the lost by ensuring that the spirit of unity remained alive among the living. They faced insurmountable odds, but together they would continue to fight for their homes and their very existence. The outcome of this fight would define them, not just as soldiers, but as men fighting for one another. As the dust began to settle in St. Lo, Klaus surveyed the aftermath of the fierce battle. The sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over the ruins of a town that had once thrived. Now it lay in devastation. Broken buildings and scattered debris mirrored the emotional landscape of those who had fought. Klaus felt a mix of triumph and sorrow as he remembered the soldiers who had stood beside him, sharing moments of camaraderie now forever lost. The German forces had successfully repelled the American advance, but the victory came with significant costs. The echoes of gunfire had faded, replaced by the quiet cries of the wounded and the somber reality of the fallen. Klaus felt a profound sense of responsibility to honor their sacrifice and ensure their legacy lived on. In the days that followed, the reality of their victory crystallized. While it was a pivotal moment in the conflict, Klaus understood that this success came with lasting repercussions. The war was far from over, and the emotional toll of their experiences weighed heavily on everyone. As Klaus and his comrades regrouped, the atmosphere was thick with exhaustion and determination. They shared stories of bravery and loss, each recounting moments that had defined their time in battle. Klaus organized memorials to pay tribute to their fallen brothers. "We owe it to them to carry on," he urged his fellow soldiers, igniting a sense of unity among them. "Remember them," he said during one gathering. "They fought with us and for us." His words resonated, reinforcing the bond that had formed in the heat of battle. They were not merely soldiers, they were a brotherhood forged in sacrifice. As time passed, the scars of war remained etched in the landscape and in the hearts of those who had fought. Slowly, townspeople began to return, cautiously reclaiming their lives amidst the remnants of destruction. Klaus felt a deep responsibility to the community, recognizing their intertwined fates. He approached the locals with compassion, seeking ways to help them rebuild. "I know we've caused pain," he spoke to a group of locals, "but we can work together to heal." Slowly, bridges were built, fostering a fragile peace amidst the remnants of war. Klaus's efforts to mend the bonds between soldiers and civilians became a source of inspiration, a testament to the human spirit's resilience. In the rebuilding efforts, Klaus often reflected on the broader implications of their struggle. The war had changed them, shaping their identities as men and soldiers. He pondered the uncertain future ahead and the lessons learned in the crucible of battle. The bonds formed through shared hardship became a beacon of hope, a reminder that humanity could shine even in the darkest days. As he looked over the slowly healing landscape of St. Lo, Klaus felt the weight of his comrades' sacrifices urging him forward. Though the scars of war would linger, he knew their stories would live on. He was determined to honor their memory through actions reflecting the unity and strength they had fought for. In quiet moments of reflection, Klaus found solace in knowing that, despite chaos and destruction, they had emerged stronger together. The fight for St. Lo was not merely a battle won, it was a turning point, a testament to resilience, and a promise to carry the legacy of their fallen brothers into the future. With each step forward, Klaus vowed to ensure that the spirit of camaraderie and sacrifice would never be forgotten.